Roughly 6 months ago, the Legion Go was released into the wild by Lenovo, and there were so many things that I personally was ridiculously excited about. Having an FPS mode that you can use with a vertical mouse that was built into the handheld itself. The tabletop mode was just something that allowed for so much more flexibility, especially when you have PC-centric games. Then you also have all of this power packed into this handheld, and there was just so much that you could do, so much untapped potential. But when I finally got it in my hands, I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of disappointed. So when I was comparing it to the Steam Deck LCD or OLED versus the ROG Ally versus the Legion Go, I didn't really enjoy my time with it. But in the comment section, there were so many people that were talking about whether this was good or not. And for a lot of people, it was their go-to, no pun intended, handheld. So I decided to give it another look and see whether or not there was something that I was missing with the Legion Go. By the way, this video is sponsored by Rocket Money, but more on that later on in the video. When I go back to the Legion Go, there are two things that immediately stand out. One, the size of the body and overall the screen itself. Those two things just blow me away. Obviously, weight is another factor that you have to take into account whenever you're talking about a handheld like this, but in the grand scheme of things, it's just two noticeable factors that just immediately stand out. Now, obviously, talking about the screen, it is probably one of the most immaculate screens that are out there, especially in contrast to everything else that is out there. We're talking about a 1600p 144 hertz refresh rate monitor, and you could also talk about the fact that it can hit 500 nits peak brightness. So it is relatively bright, especially in comparison to some of the other things that are out there. But I do want to go ahead and say, because of the fact that it's 144 hertz and 1600p, there's just a lot of power that is being consumed for the features that are on that screen. You can decrease the refresh rate from 144 hertz to 60 hertz, and you can even have the resolution that's there. So if you want to go all the way down to 800p, you can do so, and it just goes up and scales without any issues at all because of that 16:10 aspect ratio. Obviously, this is all up to you. You can tweak and change and do whatever you want in order to extend that battery life. But for me personally, if I want to go ahead and get the best experience possible, I'm gonna go ahead and crank those settings to max, baby. I wanna see as much as I can from my handheld. But this is also why a lot of the times that I do test on the Legion Go, the battery life is just atrocious, especially in contrast to the ROG Ally or the Steam Deck LCD or OLED. Of course, we also have to mention the AMD Z1 Extreme chipset that is in this handheld. It is by far one of the best handheld PC chipsets that I've seen. I mean, especially in contrast with everything else around that price point. That being said, the RAM that is in here is clocked higher than the ROG Ally. So you're looking at 16 gigabytes of RAM clocked in at 7,500 megahertz, and it does have a 49.2 watt hour battery. So you are going to have a nice deep well of juice to go ahead and power this handheld while you're gaming on it. Just because you have a large battery, though, does not mean that you're going to have a long battery life. Of course, that's dependent on so many factors, especially when you're talking about PC handhelds. You might see anywhere between an hour to an hour and a half of battery life, all the way up to 2 to 2.5 hours of battery life, depending on the games that you're playing, as well as the resolution and refresh rate of your screen. That being said, I haven't really had too much luck with my battery. Based off of the comments that I saw on the last video that I posted talking about this handheld, a lot more people were getting much more battery life than I was getting on my handheld. Maybe mine is a dud, I don't even know, but based off of what I've seen, I'm getting an average of an hour to an hour and 20 minutes, sometimes an hour and 30 minutes, depending on the games that I'm actually playing. One particular comment that I did get underneath the last video was someone saying that with the Legion Go, they could get around 4 hours on Hollow Knight. With 60 hertz quiet mode turned on, they would get 80 FPS, 1920 by 1200p, and 50 brightness. So here I am, Hollow Knight. I'm getting around 3 hours and 20 minutes, and this is currently at 85%. So if you can do the math, it's kind of more or less in line on things, but in terms of frame rate, you are going to be getting around 69 frames per second. My brightness is set to 24. This is just because it's easier on the eyes, especially, you know, here in the conditions that I'm recording in. But for the most part, I'm kind of surprised at what you can get with something that isn't going to be extremely taxing like Hollow Knight, which makes me believe that honestly, if I wanted to, I could push this to 5 hours if I could finagle some settings like kind of lowering the frame rate. God dang, it is hard to play when you're actually talking, but lowering the frame rate and actually lowering the resolution as well. So if you would put a frame limiter like 60 FPS or something like that, that might be something that is worth, you know, checking out. But I am honestly surprised at what this could go ahead and do with this in these settings in terms of battery life, because most of the games that I did test on here were, you know, AAA, AA titles that required a little tiny bit more horsepower than Hollow Knight, but for most of the other games that are there, I'm looking at, you know, that 1 to almost 1.5 hour range, especially with things like No Rest for the Wicked or Baldur's Gate 3, games like that that are recently made games that just require a lot more horsepower than Hollow Knight, for instance. Let's do a quick tour of this handheld in case you aren't familiar with it. You have your start and select button right over here, your D-pad, which leaves a lot to be desired because there really isn't that much travel distance that's here, but it does a decent job in terms of getting things done. You have 2 analog sticks that are actually Hall sensing joysticks. Here's your Legion button as well as your quick access menu. And then the front facing buttons feel kind of like a combination between the DualSense buttons as well as the Xbox Series buttons. It's kind of like a nice baby between the two. The trackpad is nice, especially because it's Windows. So if you're using Windows and this is kind of like your main way of doing things, because obviously the OS is Windows, having a mouse is honestly, it's game changing. I absolutely love it. On the top side of the unit, you are going to have your left and right bumper as well as your triggers, and then you also have the power button right here as well as a 3.5mm jack. You have your fan, your exhaust right over here, as well as 2 little tiny speakers, and then you have your microSD card slot as well as your USB-C, and you also have your volume rocker right here. On the bottom side, you are going to find another USB-C port, and you also have this kickstand that is pretty awesome. It goes pretty far down, actually. You can go really far with this, which is pretty cool. On the back side, you are going to have the back paddles that are here, and as you can see, there's 2 over here and 2 over here, so they're kind of in weird positions, but the main reason why it's like that is because of the FPS mode that comes with this. So you kind of have to be careful when you take this off, because I am prone to actually touching this power button and turning it off. So there are 2 little notches. One is right here and one is right here. If you actually go ahead and take this and push that in and pull down, not up, so it's not a Nintendo Switch, you can go ahead and remove these. Now, cool thing about this is that if you go ahead and you can use them just like this. So if you have it in tabletop mode and you don't want to use the FPS mode, you just kind of want to relax and have these here and have a little bit more of a comfortable position, you can do so and it'll work just fine, just as it would if it were attached. But there is this that comes with your Legion Go. And the cool thing about that is that if you look on the bottom of this TrueStrike controller, there is an FPS mode switch that's right here. So if you switch this on, it'll go ahead and say switch to FPS mode, and all of a sudden you put this in here and you have, congratulations, a fully functioning vertical mouse. It's pretty cool. And it doesn't work 100% with every single game that's out there, but with the wheel that requires a little bit of stretching, you can go ahead and kind of, you know, just make things work. It is a nifty little feature that's here, and it does a pretty good job. The only thing is that these back buttons that are here, as well as the back buttons that are right over here, they kind of have to be mapped out to specific things, and you have to do that manually for each and every single thing. They don't happen automatically. Also, this button that's right here, the M2, that's essentially going to be your right click. So if you want to go ahead and go in, but if you want to change something, you have to right click. So top one is to click, and then the bottom one is to right click. It feels a little bit awkward when you actually have these connected onto the body of the Legion Go, but once you get used to it, it kind of just becomes second nature to go ahead and use that as you see fit. Now, one thing that I do want to go ahead and say is that when you are going to have these be used as an FPS mode or just not be connected, you have to make sure that you actually have these attached when you turn it on. If you turn on the unit without having these attached, the controllers won't connect at all whatsoever. I don't know if that's something that can be changed via a firmware fix or a firmware update, but it leaves a lot to be desired, because sometimes I'll just have these just hanging around because I finished, you know, the night before playing video games, and then I come back to it and then I have to make sure that I set everything back up in order to play on this handheld. But overall, the sturdiness feels really good. One of the things that I was afraid of was because there's these these moving parts. Whenever you have anything that's removable or anything that you can take off, I was a little bit concerned that, you know, having that mobility and kind of having that moving components would eventually wear and tear on this unit over a long period of time. I'm happy to report that it still works just fine. The actual, you know, integrity of these controllers feel great. It's not like a Nintendo Switch where like sometimes, you know, the Joy-Cons, they'll give a little bit away and they'll move a little bit just because of the overall usage of things. That's not the case with the Legion Go. It kind of just works as it should. And it feels very sturdy. It feels very strong. And I don't really have to worry about things breaking over long periods of time. The Legion Go comes in two different flavors. You have the 512 gigabyte model, and then you have the 1 terabyte model. The 512 gigabyte model is normally $699, but currently it's on sale at Best Buy at $629. So that's $70 off in terms of savings. And the 1 terabyte model is normally $749, but it's currently at $699 at Best Buy. It might be on sale at other retailers, and you might get different rates depending on the region that you're at, but this is definitely something that's worth checking out if you're interested in this. I personally went with the 512 gigabyte model. I just thought that you get so much bang for your buck that if you want to expand that storage, you can do so at a later time, or you can even use the micro SD card that's here because you're not going to run into the same issues with it as you did with the ROG Ally. Now, I will say that if you're trying to save money and you're trying to just set money aside so you can buy something like this, I suggest that you check out Rocket Money, which is the sponsor of today's video. Listen, guys, this is really cool because I've been using Rocket Money for quite some time. See, I'm a dad. 90% of the time, I'm sitting here working, trying to go ahead and take phone calls or video calls and just make things happen for my day job. Sometimes, unfortunately, the best babysitter that I can find is the television that I have downstairs. And because of that, I'm subscribed to a ton of subscriptions. Some I use and some I don't. This is really where Rocket Money goes ahead and comes into play, because if there are some subscriptions that I'm just like, I haven't used this in forever, you can cancel those unwanted subscriptions with a couple of taps. On top of that, if you want to go ahead and lower your monthly bills, you can have Rocket Money negotiate a lower rate for you. All you have to do is just either log in through the app or just take a picture of your bill, and Rocket Money will take care of everything else for you. If you want to actually take more control of your finances, you can set up monthly budgets. That way you can control where your money is going. And if you want to take this even further, you can set up either an emergency fund, or you can set a 3-month cushion or 6-month cushion if you want to. And you can also set money aside for larger purchases down the line. So if you want to put a down payment on a house, or I don't know, put a down payment on a car, you can do that relatively easy. Or in my case, if I wanted to just put money aside so I can save for some of these handhelds, I can do so relatively easy. This is an app that I can easily recommend to anyone that wants to take control of their finances. To save money and spend less, join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. Go to rocketmoney.com/baldyrudy or follow the link in the description below. And thanks to Rocket Money for sponsoring this video. Now, the material that was used to make the Legion Go is very strong. It's very sturdy. It feels like it can take a beating, even with the detachable Joy-Con things that are there. It just feels like it can really take a beating. But I do want to go ahead and say that because of that material that's used, it's just a fingerprint magnet. Like, no matter what I do, no matter how many times I wash my hands, no matter what, there's always going to be some grease, some oil, something that is going to go ahead and get onto that handheld. And because it is a touchscreen, despite having a trackpad, it just sometimes you just need to tap, and sometimes that's just a better option overall to do things relatively quickly. Because of that, I'm always reaching out for some sort of wipe or cloth to clean everything and make sure that it's as pristine as possible, because I like to take care of my things. Okay, so when it comes to the ergonomics, there's a lot of things that work and some that just don't. For example, whenever I'm actually like holding this and I'm just, you know, holding it like this, it's fine. I can go ahead and game on this all day, all night, no problems at all. But the moment that I get into bed, or that I'm lounging on the couch and I'm kind of just, you know, leaning back and I hold it vertically like this, that's where this part of your hand is going to go ahead and start hurting after a long period of time, because you have this angular thing that's right here that's going to be digging into your palm. There's absolutely nothing that software or driver updates or anything can do to fix that. That is a physical design flaw that I don't understand why Lenovo even decided that was a good idea. Like, the way that I see it is that we're humans, we're round, we don't have angular natures. Maybe the elbow, but that, like, even still, like, we don't have angular natures to it. So it's just like, why would you bring in an angular thing? You look at all of the other handhelds that are out there, the Asus ROG Ally, the Steam Deck, even the MSI Claw, and they all understand that there has to be some form of curvature to that grip that's there. If not, things are just going to feel uncomfortable. And I can't help but feel that way when I'm using the Legion Go in handheld mode. Now, despite that angular nature, I do want to go ahead and mention that it's very easy to actually touch this trackpad when you're gaming on it, when you're having it in handheld mode, because if you're, gaming on it and the grip of the meat of your thumb goes ahead and kind of like falls right in there, like the inside of your palm, like you are going to make miss inputs, which does happen. That happens to me all the time whenever I'm gaming. Thankfully, there's a way to turn that off, and I'll show that later on in the video when I'm talking about the software that's here, because it has changed quite a bit since its first launch. There were so many things that were wrong when it first came out in terms of the Legion Go Lenovo software, but now it's actually much better in terms of that. That being said, the D-pad still feels like there's just a lot to be desired. It feels almost too clicky in contrast to everything else. I do understand, the more that I use this, why the start and select buttons are only on the left Joy-Con that's here, and the buttons themselves feel fine. There's plenty of travel distance that's there. It feels really good, and the shoulder buttons as well as the triggers feel nice. The triggers are a little tiny bit too deep, like in order to actually pull them, then they're a little bit too far, and I'll show you what I mean, especially in contrast to other things that are there. But aside from that, I do like the way that it's feel. It does take some time to get used to the way that the back paddles or the back buttons are laid out, because it feels a little odd at first, but again, it makes sense once you start using that FPS mode in contrast to everything else that's there. But in that handheld mode, it feels relatively nice. Now, I've mentioned this before in the past. I do wish that these two buttons were actually up here, if there was like a way to kind of like change it in the software so that it recognized this as the start and that as the select. But at the end of the day, I understand why Lenovo decided to go that route with this handheld, especially in contrast to the features that the FPS mode gives this handheld itself. When it comes to the audio on the Legion Go, it leaves a lot to be desired, guys. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have two tiny speakers that are at the top of the unit itself, and they're upward firing. And I hate upward firing speakers. The reason being is because once the audio comes out of those speakers, they essentially just go up. They don't go anywhere else. With front-facing speakers, you at least have it front-facing, and you can kind of have that audio come into your ears. And even with downward firing speakers, kind of like with the Ionno Flip DS, like they shoot down, so they bounce off of your lap, or if you're playing in bed, it'll bounce off of like your stomach, and kind of just, you'll hear it based off of that. But if it's upward firing, you're not going to hear anything at all. I experienced the same problem with the PlayStation Portal. They had the speakers that were at the top of the unit, and they were upward firing, and I hated it. I didn't like that experience at all, and I cannot recommend it from an auditory experience. If you are going to get the Legion Go and you are somewhat sensitive to that type of stuff, you're better off either getting headphones or earbuds that you can connect to it, just so that you can have a better experience doing so. When talking about audio, though, I can't help but notice how loud the fan is on this handheld. Now, for a lot of people, you're probably not even going to experience that, but it is definitely loud. Now, I do want to go ahead and say, though, that it is loud when under full load. Most of the time, I'm playing either games that I'm emulating, or I'm playing games that are not so taxing on the handheld itself. Probably some of the most taxing games that I've been playing on this handheld are probably Baldur's Gate 3. No Rest for the Wicked recently came out, and that is so not optimized, so the system itself is really chugging along trying to make things work on that handheld. But for the most part, you can have a pleasant experience without having to worry too much about fan noise. But I do want to go ahead and mention that when you do hit that peak of the curve, it is going to be loud, and there's nothing that you can really do about it, especially with how puny and squeaky and tiny those speakers are. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. The beautiful thing about this handheld is that it's been out on the market for quite some time. So a lot of the drivers, a lot of the updates that have been released for this handheld have only improved and have gotten better over time. And that's one of the things that I actually really like about this handheld, is the overall ease of use with the software at this point. When it first came out, it was a complete mess. Everything was janky, things weren't working properly. Sometimes I'd be in the middle of a game and I would want to either increase or decrease either the resolution or the screen brightness or even the sound, and I would need to either be connected to the AC adapter, or sometimes I would just go ahead and do that, go back to the game, and then realize that all of my inputs weren't being received by the game itself and were being received by another window that was in the back. It was a mess. It was not the best experience possible, but I can say with confidence now that it has gotten a little bit better. There are some times, though, where things kind of get a little bit janky. It's Windows, after all, guys, but it still runs relatively well in contrast to how it did when it first launched. So I've talked a little bit about how well this has aged in terms of the Legion Go software, because when it first launched, it was just super janky. But when you come into the Legion Go software for the first time, the first thing that you're going to see is actually this popular gaming platform. So from here, you can get access to all of the different gaming platforms that are out there. Some, if you have it downloaded, it'll just open right then and there. But if it's not downloaded, you can go ahead and download it if you want to, though I don't recommend Ubisoft Connect, but if that's your jam, then that's your jam. When you go down to library, all of the games that are here, like you have your recently played, but you also have all of the games that are listed here. If you were to pick a game on here, what would happen is the launcher for that game, wherever it's at, will go ahead and launch, and then after that, the game will immediately launch after that. And when it comes to game stores, it automatically goes to gamesplanet.com, which if you haven't used it before, it's a discount website for some games on Steam. But if you wanted to add other things, you can. That way you can go ahead and launch it straight from there. But it's essentially accessing their website. So it is a browser that's there. The same thing happens with cloud gaming. So it automatically goes to Xbox, which again, you have all of this stuff that's here. But if you wanted to add something, you can. But again, it's up to you. You can go ahead and change things however you see fit. After that, if we were to go into the settings menu, not much has changed here, but there are some improvements that I personally have noticed since starting to update everything and getting the drivers up and running. In the general section, it's pretty straightforward. You can optimize battery charging. You have the current version of the software that's there. In performance, though, here's the cool thing. So you have your pretty much your basic performance profiles that are here. You have your performance, and then you have your power saving. But if you wanted to do custom, you have two custom settings that are here. So if you go down, you have your thermal mode for everything to be set up, as well as your fan mode. And then if you wanted to adjust the fan curve, you can if you want to. There is an FPS limiter that's here, which I personally don't really care for, but there is an OS power mode. So if you wanted to change the OS power mode from performance to balanced or efficient, you can do so right then and there from here. If you go into the Bluetooth settings, everything's right here. Yeah, you just pair it and boom, you're done. Network, again, for your Wi-Fi, you can go ahead and do that. Display is really cool here because when this first launched, you essentially needed to come in, and if you wanted to adjust the resolution, so if you wanted to do 1280 by 800, you would need to be connected to a power outlet through their power brick. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The same thing for the refresh rate. You would have to go ahead and have that connected. After updates, everything's just running straight natively on here, which is nice because I never understood why that would require a power outlet anyways for that stuff. But again, it is nice to go ahead and have that. So if you wanted to adjust things and set things up, you can do so accordingly. FSR is here too. If you wanted to use, RSR is here. If you wanted to go ahead and use that, it's a nice option. Now, when it comes to audio, I've talked about how much I don't like it. And when it comes to the controller, though, it's cool because you can adjust the vibration. There's different controller modes, obviously button mapping. You can test out different things. You can change the gyro behavior. So if you wanted to go in and you wanted to change how things work, then you can go ahead and do so. You can adjust the dead zones. Now, these are Hall sensing joysticks, so you don't have to worry about, saving that dead zone that's in the middle in order to protect the potentiometer connectors that are there. But for the most part, it just works, which is nice. And if you wanted to adjust the sensitivity of the joysticks, you can as well. And there is trigger travel. So if you wanted to adjust that, you can do so as well. Now, there is this enable touchpad thing that's here. Now, whenever I'm gaming, I have big hands. So whenever I'm gaming like this, and I already felt it vibrate because I touched the actual touchpad with the meat of my thumb. So whenever I'm gaming, that would accidentally, put in inputs into the game itself, and it would switch from controller mode to mouse mode. And it sucks because here I am trying to play the game, and it just kind of like breaks because sometimes, for example, in Baldur's Gate 3, things just kind of have to go ahead and stop. It adjusts to the different layout for the screen and the HUD, the heads-up display, and it just, kind of breaks the immersion a little bit on things. Control hibernation is there. Touchpad vibration is there if you want to set that up. Okay, function shortcut keys. This is actually pretty cool. So if you hold this Legion key that's right here and you hold this LB button, everything is going to go ahead and come up. So all of the different shortcuts that are available to you, you can do this at any point while using this handheld, and it'll just work fine. I love this because having these shortcuts, lessens the amount of time that I have to spend in the quick access menu or the actual settings menu in the Legion Go software. So it is relatively nice to have that. If you buy new True Strike controllers, you can actually update their software from here, which is nice. But for the most part, it does update whenever you update the Legion Go software. If you want to customize things, the only thing you can really customize are the LEDs that are underneath the joysticks, as well as the LED that is on the power button. When it comes to disk space, I have a lot of stuff that's installed on here, so it just allows you to see things, and you can manage things if you want to. Screenshots, pretty straightforward. If you take screenshots when you're gaming, you can go ahead and access them there. Download is the download path for anything that you do download. So driver updates is pretty cool because this updates relatively quickly. Usually it's like every other week. Sometimes you'll get something that randomly pops up as like a hotfix, but for the most part, you start scanning. I believe that I updated this recently, but I don't know. Sometimes, well, there you go. So there's an AMD chipset driver, which is nice. It's cool because it'll download, and then after that you'll install, and after installing the selected update, please restart your computer. So again, pretty straightforward when it comes down to it. And then after that, you have access to Android games if you wanted to go ahead and get Android games on your Legion Go. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but you don't want to go ahead and access this huge menu and go through all of these menu little tabs or whatever when you're gaming. This is where this button goes ahead and comes into play. This is your quick access menu. Now, if you go to the top, you have your performance settings. So I would say 90% of everything that we saw in the settings menu for the Legion Go software, the stuff that we saw over here can live right here, which is really cool because if you want to change things on the fly for whatever reason, you can do so just like that. So up here you have your performance, your power saving, and then your custom, and then like I said, everything is literally right here. You don't have to worry about anything. When it comes to settings, you have all of these different settings. If you want to swap the resolution quickly, you can. Refresh rate, you can. If you want to set up your frame monitor, you can do so right here. So if you want a normal, if you want to do a simple one where it's just your FPS, like you can do that. I love the all frame monitor option because you do have your battery meter that's here, and it tells you more or less how much battery you have left in terms of time, depending on like how much wattage is being consumed on things. So if we look at it, it's 2 hours and 5 minutes right now, but that'll fluctuate depending on what you're doing. So if you're playing a game, that is probably going to be like an hour and a half maybe, and again, dependent on the resolution, dependent on the TDP that's being used, as well as the refresh rate of the screen, or I wanted to say monitor, but yeah, the screen that's here. Continuing going further down, you do have RSR that's available to you. A lot of the settings for your controller are literally sitting right here. You won't be able to test things too much, but you can change things on the fly, including that enable touchpad. So if you want to do that straight from here, you can do so. And if you want to swap it quickly, you can. Now, this is different than in the regular settings menu. You have your system quick settings. So I love this because there are some instances where I want to go ahead and type something out. And that's where the virtual keyboard comes into play. So hold on a second. This is actually not the default. So when you first get your Legion Go and you start typing, your keyboard's going to look like this. There are some games that might require more complex inputs, or you might need access to the function keys. In order to do that, you go to keyboard layout and go into traditional, and then boom, you are going to have a traditional keyboard right in front of you. If you want to access the function buttons, you can do so accordingly. Your Windows button is right here. So it is nice being able to have that right then and there, because there are some instances where you are going to need that, or it might even be required. But you also have, your Alt Escape, Windows plus D, Alt F4, like all of these different shortcuts are here. If you want to take a screenshot, you can. You want to push the escape key, you can. All of this stuff is here, which is really, really nice. Now, there is a productivity mode. If you wanted to use an external monitor for whatever reason, you can do so. I will talk a little bit more about using this with docks later on in the video, but for the most part, this is a nice to have for somebody that's using this for not just playing games, but also for, well, being productive. And finally, you do have your help center. If you wanted to ask any questions, get online support, or just contact Lenovo for any reason, you have that right then and there for you to use. Emulating on the Legion Go is absolutely awesome. I totally love it because when it comes down to it, it's just an amazing experience thanks to EmuDeck and how easy it is to install that on Windows handhelds. Once I got EmuDeck installed and up and running, it was just a smooth process of just dragging and dropping files into the right directories, and boom, I was done. I was gaming. With the handheld, in terms of performance though, that's really where this thing shines. I mean, if you're playing just Nintendo or Super Nintendo or even N64 games, everything just runs fine. You don't have to worry about anything. Even on GameCube, I didn't really run into any performance dips at all. PlayStation 2, same situation. PlayStation 1, totally fine. When I got to PS3 era, that's where things kind of started to get a little bit choppy, because at the end of the day, you need to compile the shaders that are on that system for those games. So while those shaders are compiling, there is going to be a performance dip, but once they're done, everything runs extremely smooth. The same thing goes for Cemu. Once that's up and running, like, you don't really have to worry about anything. It's just working as it should. So if you're considering getting the Legion Go as something that you can play, yes, your Steam games like normal without any issues, and also have games where you can do retro emulation, then this might be the one that I would recommend, because the performance is just astounding. It's completely awesome being able to play PS3 titles and not have to worry about any performance dips on this handheld. When talking about PC games running on the Legion Go, this is where things kind of get interesting, because see, the Legion Go in and of itself, when you compare it on the spec sheet, it is not on par with the ROG Ally. The ROG Ally is completely different despite having that same chipset. Talking about a 16:9 screen versus a 16:10, and this is all the way up to 144 Hz, whereas the ROG Ally is 120 Hz. Also, we have to talk about 1080 versus 1600. So when we're talking about the difference between all of these, if you knock down the resolution of the Legion Go, which is something that, by the way, a lot of people in the comment section recommended, when you knock down the resolution on the Legion Go and you knock down the refresh rate, it performs much better than it would have at that 1600, which this is the thing that sucks, because I saw the spec sheet, I fell in love with it. I was like, oh my god, like, look at think of like the resolution, think of the frames, think of everything that could be possible. And although the performance is on par with the ROG Ally, if you decrease the resolution and refresh rate, it performs better than the ROG Ally does at its full resolution, which is one of the things that really truly excites me, because it allows for so much power to be unleashed and focused more on not resolution but frame rate. Now, I have always been a fan or advocate of going with frames over resolution, because I would rather have something run at, let's say, 60 FPS and be 1080 than go with 4K and it, try to chug along at like 30. That's just my opinion. But when it comes to this, it allows for so much more. Now, obviously, if you want to go ahead and play FPS games, you can do so. You can do so quite easily. And having that vertical mouse functionality, that FPS mode that unlocks, it's so cool being able to have something like this that you can take with you on the go. Obviously, you're not going to be winning any tournaments or like, doing any, you're not going to be like killing it when it comes to Destiny 2 or like if you're playing Overwatch or anything like that. It's not going to be, your go-to, but it is nice to have that functionality that you can take with you if you're traveling, or if if this is your main go-to gaming rig, if you want to go ahead and call it that. And, if you're using it for productivity as well, like there's so much that you can do with that FPS mode that it kind of allows for so much more versatility in the grand scheme of things. This is definitely something to take into consideration if you're thinking about getting this for yourself. Obviously, you're not gonna have to worry about any anti-cheat or anything like that, because of the fact that this is Windows. Obviously, because of its Windows, you are going to have to deal with some of the jank that comes with the Windows, and especially in a handheld form, but it still definitely goes ahead and helps with all of the stuff. Very, very cool stuff. It's exciting. It's exciting, and I love how well this handheld has matured since its release. The cool thing about this handheld is that you could actually use it to also be productive. Because of that vertical mouse, it allows for a lot of flexibility, because you can also use it for work, not just pleasure. So being able to connect it to an external monitor is pretty important. The first time that I tried to go ahead and do this with the Legion Go, it didn't work that well. There were just a lot of problems that I ran into, and at the end of the day, it just didn't work. I'm happy to say, with all of those driver updates that have come out since its launch, it works just the way that it should. It still shows up as a 16:10 aspect ratio on the output monitor, but if you want to, you can still go ahead and hook it up and it works just fine. So who is the Legion Go for? Well, if I were to recommend it to anyone, it would be somebody that does not care about ergonomics, does not care about the weight or just anything. They just want the best of the best, because that's really truly what it comes down to. This is a spec beast. You're going to get the most power, you're going to get the most RAM, you're going to get the highest frame rate, as well as refresh rate and the highest resolution on any handheld that we've seen to date. That being said, you also have to trade off specific things because of that, because it's not ergonomic. I personally don't find it comfortable to game on after a long period of time. It just, the edges of those True Strike controllers start to dig into my skin. There is a missed opportunity that I said in my initial review that I still agree with. There's a missed opportunity to allow for third-party companies to come in and create custom True Strike controllers, or maybe there might be other functionality that could be released for these True Strike controllers, different versions that Lenovo releases. It's just, there's so much untapped untapped potential. Like, let's say we didn't want a vertical mouse and we wanted a horizontal mouse. What if we could go ahead and design a True Strike controller that would allow that functionality? That would be awesome. That would be so cool. But I feel like just going with this kind of limits that. I will say that I am excited for the future of Lenovo. If they decide to release a Legion Go 2 and they take all of this criticism that not just myself, but also other reviewers have been giving, it really allows for, I don't know, just a limitless potential. I'm really excited to see what will come in the future from Lenovo. It's just, there's so much here, and those little tweaks, little tiny tweaks, and it could become even better. It's an exciting time to be a PC gamer. So what do you guys think of the Legion Go? Is this something that you have for yourself? What are your thoughts on it? And are you considering getting one for yourself? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on things. And if you want to hear my thoughts of the Legion Go in comparison to the ROG Ally and the Steam Deck, click this video over here. If you want to hear my initial review and you want to see how this was when it first launched, then click this video over here. And until next time, guys, I will see you on the next one. Peace.